Good afternoon, folks. We're going to be starting today's webinar in about a minute or two. So finish up gathering your lunch or whatever you're doing and come on back and we'll talk to you shortly. Good afternoon, folks. We're still waiting for some more folks to come into the room here. I can see the people in the parking lot still pulling in. In the meantime, what I'll do is my favorite PBS station impression here and saying that we're encouraging folks who are calling in today to consider subscribing to the local Mailers Hub. And we have the offer we had for the summer available still for folks on today's webinar in case you're interested. As I said, that's my little PBS station impression. We're going to be starting our real webinar here in about a minute. I still see folks signing in, so I'll give them a chance to sit down and get themselves organized before we start. Back to you shortly. Okay, well, good afternoon, folks. Again, welcome to this afternoon's Mailers Hub webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the political chess game, and we're going to be reprising the presentation we had earlier this year and looking at round two, what's going on now, that things are continuing to evolve in the Postal Service. We're going to be talking about some general topics here, including the Postal Service's volume and revenue situation, what's going on in operations, its organization, legislative issues, the outlook for the future, and of course, a little bit of a summary as to what you can do to keep yourselves informed about what's going on. First thing is that volume, of course, is down. It's been declining pretty steadily since March, but that rate of decline has eased. So now we're down about 25–30%, sometimes 15–20% other times. The declines do vary from week to week as you go through the month and different cyclical mailings occur. But parcel volume, which was up a lot, is also easing somewhat. The comparison from volume last year is not as it was. So what you're seeing is that the numbers are coming more down to where they were. For the week of August 24th, for example, the overall mail decline was 15.5%. First class was down primarily because of a drop in single piece or retail mail. Pre-sort's been pretty steady all along. In the low single digits, there it was down almost 4%. Periodicals have varied widely, but I guess if there's any good news in this list, it's marketing mail. In this case, it's down just over 16%. At one point, it was down over 40% earlier along in the pandemic. So there's a certain degree of recovery occurring there. As I said, packages, which are now, in this example, up almost 36%, have been in some weeks up over 50 or 60%, but that is what's easing, either because competitors are taking away some volume or because people simply are shopping more now or whatever. But we're seeing that the numbers are becoming a little bit more normalized over time, and hopefully as the season progresses here, we'll see a little bit more improvement. In July, the numbers were very unusual. You can see the volume figures there in red for the letters and flats classes, if you will, the market dominant classes, being down 11.4% for the month, almost 10% for the year to date. But competitive products at this point were up over 50% compared to last year for July, and up almost 20% for the year to date. Again, we're looking at a July snapshot, which is probably the fifth month or the fourth or fifth month that you've had the impact of COVID reflected in postal figures. Revenue is the strange thing. Initially, as we'll be talking about in a little bit, there were horrible fears of the bottom dropping out of revenue, but actually because of what's happening to the total cash flow because of packages, you can see that revenue for July was up over 11% compared to last July, and right now it's actually up for the year. So you're close to 2% above where you were last year, ironically, even though your traditional big classes of mail, first class and of course marketing mail, are both down significantly. But you can see the figure there for competitive products, over 22% increase in revenue. So that's the good news in some ways. The bad news is, of course, that expenses are continuing to run ahead of last year. Part of that, of course, is absenteeism. You've got folks who are not at work for one reason or another. And you've got the more labor-intensive increase in package volume. So this has resulted in a loss of over $1 billion for July, and a considerably larger loss at this point in the year compared to where you were in 2019. So you're like $2 billion ahead of behind, I guess, whichever way you want to look at it. $2 billion worse than you were last July, which is not a good thing. The trends, of course, are pretty much in the background, the same things that they've always been. First class single piece mail is continuing to decline in any case. You've got some transition to electronic format continuing, but the reason you've got a relatively smaller decrease in first class, particularly free sort, is because you've got a lot of mailing volume in there that are things like bills and statements that are not sensitive to the economic impact of the pandemic. You're not going to stop getting an electric bill because there's a pandemic going on. Yeah. Periodicals have been unusually squirrely, where some weeks you've had a big decrease in volume, other weeks it's up a little bit or not down by that much. Some situations have been driven by subscriber choices. Don't send me magazines during the pandemic or whatever. And while marketing mail is highly sensitive to discretionary options by ratepayers, so you'd have that initial big drop as you had closures in retail and service industries, but that's picking up a little bit now because there's been somewhat of an uptick in consumer activity. So there's a real correlation there, and hopefully that will increase. On the nonprofit portion, there wasn't as bad a hit because, of course, the need for nonprofits to collect donations and support does not go away. In fact, it probably gets worse at times like this. And package services, you've got the obvious reflection of the loss of stores to go shopping at. But how long this is going to last is another question. You've got retail outlets that are failing, Bed Bath & Beyond, Penny's and Sears, and the list goes on of companies that are closing. So the question is how much of that shopping activity will go to online, and how much of that online activity will be of a benefit to the Postal Service. UPS and FedEx aren't sitting around watching. They're obviously going to be interested in catching up on this volume as well. So how much stays with the Postal Service and how much benefit that provides to them remains to be seen. Now, what's going on in operations? Well, obviously everybody's hearing about one disaster after another if you read some of the media. But here are some of the facts. Transportation has been impacted, of course, because you've got a lot less airline activity. Some airlines are down 80, 90% or more from their pre-COVID levels of activity. So each aircraft that comes out of service, each leg that is not flown is one less place to put mail that normally would fly, first class, priority mail, and so forth. So in some situations, there have been alternatives available Postal Service still works with its frenemies, whatever you want to call them, UPS and FedEx, who write a lot of lift, but they're getting more activity. Of course, they have to carry themselves. So that's pushing what would normally fly onto the ground, and obviously it takes longer to drive someplace than to fly someplace. So that's causing an impact right there. Then you've got processing impacts at different facilities, whether it's an NDC or a PNDC. And early along, New Jersey and Detroit were hot spots. There was a lot of impact there. And that situation continues to move around. Different places have greater impacts at one point or another. And 2 weeks later, that one's better, and another one over there is worse. And you've got, operations trying to handle this by, in some cases, doing some offloading. In other cases, where even you're not doing that, they're still rehandling because of how things are not moving as fast as they normally would by air, for example. And then individual post offices, carrier units, whatever, those are being impacted as well. And while those are temporary and localized, they still do affect service. And to the extent that there's a certain volume of mail moving through NDC X and PDC Y and carrier unit Z, you're going to have the possibility of compounding the problem of delays because of absenteeism or other problems that affect the ability of the facility to operate at full capacity. Unfortunately, the Postal Service is terrible at letting people know what's going on. We have biweekly calls to the Postal Service, and it's embarrassing to say that sometimes callers will say we're having a problem here, and the postal executives on the phone will say, well, tell us where that is, and we'll look into it. I think it's not a secret to say that the Postal Service is extraordinarily well wired right now internally. It knows what each machine is doing, each facility is doing. It knows how much volume it's handling and everything else you need to figure out to run a system as large as they've got. So it's kind of odd that they don't have, nor do they communicate information about where they're having localized problems. It isn't like somebody screwed up because they got sick. It's a perfectly understandable problem, which unfortunately they're not sharing with the industry, so the industry can react accordingly and plan to work around these problems when they want to get mail to customers. This slide here shows you the last 3 quarters of service at the national level, national scores. And as you can see by the bottom line, that bottom row, the 3rd quarter, which was April to June, which was the earlier part of the pandemic, you had some situations where service was down, but some situations where it wasn't down compared to the previous quarter. The biggest impact was for flats, and of course periodicals, because they're mostly flats, where you had some really dismal figures. We ran the service scores in the newsletter, as we do every quarter, and as you have seen in previous quarters, some places did relatively well despite the pandemic. Some had decent scores. Other places that had bad service, they've always had bad service, had absolutely worse service. So it's, again, not a situation where you can say from A to B, you're going to get bad service, or A to X, you're going to get good service. It's a matter very much of the situation, the circumstances at the time, and the facilities that are involved, and how well they have the resources to move the mail over any given period of time. So that's sort of what's going on in that regard. Delivery, excuse me. Delivery is something which is, again, being impacted. If you've got 5 carriers out of a post office of 100 carriers, it's one thing. You've got 5 carriers out of a post office with 30 carriers, it's a whole different story. Routes continue to be delivered, of course, 6 days. It's a local decision based on how many people are available, what can be curtailed. That is a last option, if you will. No one's going to choose to curtail mail or curtail routes if they don't have to. But if you don't have people, obviously you have to make decisions about what to do with the mail you've got available. And at that point, it's a matter of how you can do the most you can do with the people you've got on hand. There is no national policy on this. Nobody's headquarters is telling the field what to do. But even so, they have a level of awareness that they're not sharing with the customers. So that means if you're in Jefferson City, Missouri, and you're seeing delays in certain zip codes, what you're seeing is something which should not be your experience. It should be something reported to you because of the Postal Service's knowledge what's going on in its own facilities. Sometimes people see these irregularities because of informed delivery. If you're one of the 30 million subscribers to informed delivery, you'll look at your little notice in the morning and you'll see, oh, I'm getting a bill from the power company today, but it doesn't show up, or it'll the actual piece will show up the next day, or you'll see the same image 2 days in a row. This is because sometimes the piece of mail you're looking at in the informed delivery has been scanned and sent for delivery to the post office, but it didn't get delivered that day because the carrier was out, because the person who was forced into service on that route, the temp, didn't get to your part of the route, or because whatever was not delivered got put back in the collection mail and seen again at the plant, giving you the second image. But again, these are localized problems. Nationally, delivery is not, the number is probably a day late. I think I've seen some numbers from different sources, different companies who track mail. And they've reported delays overall nationally of less than a day to just over a day in the movement of first class, for example. So yes, you're going to have some delays. You're going to see these situations in some cases because of delivery unit shortages or upstream shortages at the plant. Now, over the past 3 months, I guess, we've heard all sorts of stories about what's going on, who's doing what, what's been ordered, what's been stopped. And if you can filter through all the noise and understand some facts, you have a much clearer picture of what's really happening. Overtime, the issue of overtime was brought about by an OIG, Office Inspector General audit that was conducted the first part of the year. And if you read the audit, it's obvious that the Postal Service has a problem, not just the level of overtime, but in its lack of control over the generation of overtime. In some situations, they found that all the overtime in the New York area facility was all what they call penalty overtime. So it's part of it is because part of the overtime problem is because you need more people to cover absences than you have, so you're going to pay overtime for it. That's understandable, and it's cheaper in some cases. I guess UPS has this thinking. It's cheaper in some cases to pay overtime than it is to hire a person, then have commitments to that person for their whole work life, including their retirement. That's one thing. But the Postal Service was not managing overtime well, period, as the OIG found. So any comments that came out of headquarters suggesting overtime needs to be better scrutinized and controlled did not mean, as it was taken in some quarters, to mean you can't have any overtime. That's unrealistic. And the same thing for carrier schedules and for transportation. The notion of keeping things operating on a schedule is not something which should be controversial. The Postal Service has standard operating plans, has all sorts of software and documentation about how things should operate and run on time. At this point, of course, you've got employee issues because you've got too few people in some cases to get the mail out the back door. Who's going to sweep the bins? Who's going to get the stuff in the trays? Who's going to push things out or haul things out to the back dock? Who's got to load the trucks? We're short on people. In some situations, there was again this, oh, well, they told us we had to be on time, period. And that's not the message. The message was you have schedules, you're supposed to follow them. But if you can't follow, there's a reason to not leave on time, but you're waiting for mail, that's appropriate. So you have this back and forth between people either not doing anything to manage things responsibly or overreacting and then just cutting things where it shouldn't have been cut. That caused a lot of concern, that caused a lot of publicity, that caused a lot of accusations, when in fact, the substance of it was not quite as spectacular as they'd have you believe. The same thing for processing equipment. The Postal Service has been shedding excess equipment for years. If you're this year, you're on track to have, I think, like somewhere around 110, 111, 112 billion pieces of mail in the system. In 2007, you had 212 billion pieces of mail in the system. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if I have 40% less mail, I don't need to have the whole fleet of equipment that I had to process the larger number. So they've been taking out machines for years, and they're continuing to do so. The trouble is now this relatively normal activity that any industry would conduct when it's activity is when this processing activity or production activity goes down, is suddenly being viewed through a political lens because people think it's something being done to hurt vote by mail. Well, I don't think that's the purpose, because if that's the purpose, they haven't been trying to hurt vote by mail for the past 10 years. So that's what's going on in equipment. You're still going to have a remaining fleet perfectly capable of handling all of this, all the remaining volume of election mail or holiday mail or whatever. As far as collection boxes, another thing that's been blown out of proportion. Collection boxes are supposed to be monitored every year to see if they're being used. There's no point in having a blue box sitting on a street corner to get 2 letters a day. Anybody with a mailbox at their home or business can put outgoing mail for the carrier to take. So you're not being deprived of the ability to enter mail into the system if you don't happen to have a blue box at the corner. Just the same, you've got situations where some boxes were studied and found to be unused. They were taken out. Trouble is, the Postal Service didn't always do their studies on time. And sometimes they took out boxes they should have taken out. They left boxes in place they should have taken out. They're also in the process in some areas of taking out the conventional box and replacing it with a more secure box. And that of course, sometimes the box goes away and another one comes back the next day. Sometimes they don't do it at the same time. And some places boxes were removed because there was unrest of some sort. There's no point having a box in a neighborhood where you've got rioting going on, because you don't want somebody using the box for, to put a bomb in it or some horrible purpose. And some boxes were chained shut in some locations because people would throw crap in the box, probably literally, or they'd throw something flammable in the box. And so there are reasons why you had these situations which were heavily reported and skewed to mean we don't want people to have a way to put their ballots in the mailbox, which isn't the case at all. And retail hours, again, this is part of the overreaction to some of the information that was coming out of headquarters earlier along. And it is not a situation where we're going to close post offices now to avoid overtime. If there's a staffing, and there is a staffing issue in a lot of places, they don't have enough people. And they're making up for this lack of people by overtime. So responsible management means get the number of people you need, manage your overtime, and operate in a sensible fashion. And apparently the pendulum went one way then the other. That's part of the problem. But in case anybody comes to you locally and says, can the Postal Service handle election mail? Can the Postal Service handle holiday mail? The answer would be yes. There's no component of all this other alleged activity that's going to make the Postal Service unable to handle either of those 2 types of mail. But, on the issue of election mail, there's one thing that those of you who are involved with local jurisdictions in preparing election mail need to recognize the legitimate point the Postal Service has made in a couple of ways. One is, essentially, they're preparing a bulk mailing at first or marketing at last, but they're essentially preparing a bulk mailing. And these poor folks from the local election group aren't experienced mail producers. So they're going to have some help to make sure that what they produce is actually, the kind of mail that the system would like to have. Proper barcode, good addresses, all that kind of thing. And in some jurisdictions, the voter is allowed to ask for a ballot the day before the election, and they're supposed to get it back before the polls close. Well, physically, it's not possible for the Postal Service to move a piece of mail that fast. So these are some of the things that have come out in the course of the conversation about election mail. And it's not a matter of the Postal Service not wanting to handle it. It's a matter of people preparing a mailing, like any other mailing, only a very important mailing, but still one that has to fit within the broad parameters of how mail moves. Now, this chart up here shows you how things looked at headquarters, in case you cared, before July, or in July, before August. So as you can see, you had a certain number of people at the top there in the blue boxes who were the big poobahs. And then you have this new chart that came out in August when there was a reorganization. And this brought about a certain level of concern too. But a couple of things that need to be understood here. The first is, there on the left-hand side, you've got a very different organization of operations and retail and delivery than you had before. And now you've got essentially the COO, who is now the Chief Logistics and Processing Operations Officer, David Williams, who is in charge of moving the mail, the plants, the logistics, and that's it. A separate individual on the far left, Kristen Seaver, who's now in charge of delivery and retail, has the post offices and has retail as delivery operations. So you have this division that wasn't quite as much of a bright line before as it is now. And then the third box on the left, which is where Jackie Strako is, she was formerly the marketing officer, the chief marketing officer. There's an interesting group there because they are in place to look for new revenue opportunities. So you can see that the first box is facilities. Why would you put facilities over there? Well, you think about it, the facilities are all the square footage of the Postal Service's properties. And, how can those be monetized? You can say, well, we're going to put a Wells Fargo branch in there or something. Who knows what you could do? But if you've got real estate, a business would want to capitalize the chance to make that real estate pay for itself or bring in some money. The same thing with transportation. If you've got trucks that are moving around and I'm not packing them full of mail, well, what can I do with that space besides moving air? So these are some examples of what's been changed here for better or for worse. Every PMG who comes in reorganizes things. Every PMG who comes in wants things done his or her way. So this is nothing abnormal. But this is a little bit different spin on how it's been done in the past. Now, in this chart, you can see, excuse me, that instead of having 7 areas with an area VP, you've got basically 2 areas dealing with operations. That's a lot of real estate to cover, I have to admit. But you've got 2 individuals directly reporting to who is effectively the COO. And those individuals have a direct line of sight to the districts. So if the purpose of this whole reorg was to have, as the phrase goes, the better line of sight from top to bottom. So this presumably would provide that when it comes to operations. That is the plants, SDCs, NDCs, the logistics of moving mail around in those different territories. On the retail and post office operations side, you've got 4 areas now. And that's not a whole lot less, I guess, or a whole lot better than what you had, or different than what you had before. But you've still got a lot more real estate to cover, but a better line of sight from top to bottom. Kristen Seaver's at the very top, going through 4 subordinates, each of whom has a territory to cover, and they're responsible for all the post offices and the retail operations within those respective areas. You figure the Northeast, you've got New England and New York down to the Mid-Atlantic. A lot of post offices there, a lot of employees, but that's the way that's going to be managed now. We'll see how it works. Legislatively, this is. I hope you're not expecting to hear a lot of what's going on in Congress, because there isn't an awful lot going on in Congress as far as the Postal Service is concerned, except a lot of questions. The only thing that had anything of any benefit, if you will, to the Postal Service was the very first thing that was passed in the spring, the CARES Act. And that did not write a check. That just authorized the Postal Service to borrow more money. So, I don't know how wise it is to tell an organization that's already billions in debt to, here, you can borrow more money. Here's a drowning man, hand him an anvil. But that's what was authorized. And then there were conditions to this loan, and those conditions were apparently just reached. There's a lot of publicity attached to that, of course, in that the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, is aligned with the president. And of course, you've got the PMG and the board now all kind of aligned. So there's a lot of sideways looks. All of a sudden, after a few months, the agreement was struck as the conditions that would be attached to this loan. I don't think it would be PC for me to comment on that whole thing, but obviously the circumstances, the optics are what they are, and that just speaks for itself. Nothing has been in bills that have come out later. No, I shouldn't say nothing. There have been things that have been inserted by the House that never made it through the Senate. You've got diametrically opposed partisan constituencies in the 2 houses of Congress. And if one says less filling, the other one will say tastes great. But that's just about how it works. There is very little room for compromise, very little interest in compromise. So whatever is done, whatever was possibly to be done for the Postal Service never got enacted. So right now, despite all the pleas from all kinds of quarters, there still is no money coming to the Postal Service. The last thing that was done was a $25 billion-dollar appropriation stuck into a bill that was passed about a month ago by the House. That's not going to get voted on in the Senate. So a lot of it's just, looks good in the House. They know it's not going to go anyplace. They can say they did their job. There's no help at all coming from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, of course. I don't need to reiterate some of the things that have appeared in on Twitter or other places about the Postal Service. But there's a lot of misinformation going on there. There's a certain lack of grasp of basic postal facts about parcel pricing, about what's going on with parcels of the Postal Service in general. And of course, a lot of it ties back to Amazon, because Amazon's owner owns the Washington Post. The Washington Post criticizes the administration. So it's a situation where the Postal Service the merits of what needs to be done with the Postal Service have been totally sucked into this this political swirl, where what is being done or not done is always being decided based upon a variety of essentially irrelevant political concerns. Including the Postal Service, the Board of Governors is viewed as being politicized because all the members of the board have been appointed by the current president. That's not because he was magic. It's because, thanks to Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who put a hold on all the previous governor confirmations in the Senate, we ran out of governors. So finally, when the president came on board, there were no governors. He had the chance to put in his own people, and he did. He started out with William Duncan, currently the board chairman, and David Williams, who has since left, unfortunately. So the remaining half dozen governors now are still as appointees. And as you would see in a political appointment, persons who are politically aligned. That's just the way it works. So they got a person for PMG under circumstances that, depending what you want to read, were straightforward or not. But nonetheless, Mr. DeJoy is there now, and he's the PMG. I don't think that circumstance has helped a lot, given the partisanship right now going on. So he's viewed as an extension of the administration, rightly or wrongly. So any reaction towards him is in some ways to make him a proxy for the White House. And if you watch the hearings that were held in the House 2-3 weeks ago, it was so obvious that there was no real postal conversation going on. It was just get this person in here and let's be nice to him or not nice to him because of who he represents. So it just shows you the problem right now in trying to deal with the Postal Service as an entity and as an objective concern, when you have such a level of partisan nonsense going on that just colors everything and makes discussion of anything on the merits impossible. And of course, you had the whole issue about the election mail and so forth, and what's going on because of what the PMG said or didn't say, wants or doesn't want, what he's being told to do or isn't being told to do. So, with all this in mind, the crystal ball, unfortunately, remains very cloudy. This is the same cloudy condition we had months ago, and it's not getting any better. Volume, well, this is a relatively easy part to look at. The fourth quarter numbers, which go through the end of this month, won't be out until sometime in November, probably. It usually takes quite a while to get the end of year numbers out, even longer than the end of quarter numbers. Expectation is for volume for the fiscal 20 to be down about 10-20% below last year. The number varies. Return of volume is not expected until next year, but you're seeing it return in some ways already, thankfully. Based upon what happened after the Depression, the recession in 2008, there were horror stories about how much mail will be lost forever because of the pandemic. The numbers now are projected to be 25% below what they were before the pandemic, and kind of stay in that neighborhood. That was the projection you got 4 or 5 months ago. Whether that's still going to hold true, I don't know. Because, for one thing, the revenue projections themselves are off. Initially, talking to the folks at the Postal Service early along in March and April, there were horrible numbers coming out. Billions and billions and billions being lost because of the pandemic. But what actually happened, of course, was much different. You had a surprising boost because of parcel volume, and that brought numbers not only down less, but actually up. So now the Postal Service is no longer even issuing lost estimates because there is no way to reliably figure what's going to be happening in the future. And it's, as they have said, it's unknown territory. Just the same, you've got a financial circumstance where, the burn rate is what the burn rate is. You're still paying people, their salaries every 2 weeks. You're still paying for transportation. You're still paying overtime. You're still paying the power bill, whatever. So barring either relief from debt or increases in revenue, there is still a point in the future which keeps moving when they be out of cash. And when that happens, of course, maybe then Congress will act, but not a day and a half earlier. Cost control is probably their bigger problem. The Postal Service is not able to shrink itself down to where it should be because of having 35-40% less mail, permanently less mail. And you've got post offices that are not profitable. The majority of those aren't profitable. Congress still keeps saying you have to go around 6 days a week, even though the American public has said they don't need 6-day delivery of letters and flats, at least, maybe parcels. But people also expect service. I'm going to put a mailbox in Jersey City on Monday. I want it to be in Los Angeles on Thursday. So you've got fixed costs because of a fixed network to provide these services. And you've got a labor situation where you can't shed people. You can't say, well, sorry, we have 40% less mail. I need 40% fewer people. There are no layoff clauses for the majority of the unionized employees. You're limited as to how many people you can have who are part-time, non-career people by contract. They're guaranteed certain financial benefits. And this crossing crafts issue is something which means if you've got a post office with 10 clerks and 10 carriers, you cannot tell one of the clerks to go work and deliver a route one day if you're a career employee, because that's crossing crafts. You can't have a rural carrier come in and cover a city route, crossing crafts. So there's a lot of rigidity inside the Postal Service's workforce that further inhibits the ability to control costs. Meanwhile, and this is something which is a concern to all of us because our clients, your clients, are the ones who pay the bills. You can just do so much to raise revenue, and the cap is there. The cap is going to keep the price down. So how much revenue they can bring in, how much they can go into one category of mail or another to find some additional money is very limited. So it's not a sensible model if you think about it. You've got fixed obligations. I have to go to 155 million, whatever the number is now, addresses every day, 6 days a week. I take much less mail to those destinations, at least letters and flats. The revenue per piece is down. I cannot curtail some situations, some services, I should say, in locations because there's no business. So and I can't raise enough revenue to pay for it. The question has been brought up very logically that maybe it's time to stop expecting ratepayers to cover the costs of services that are demanded by someone other than those who are paying the bills. If the Postal Service's universal service obligation is going to be viewed as a public service mandate, then the Congress who issues this mandate should be subsidizing it in some way, back to the way things were 40 years ago. They should be giving some money to the Postal Service to cover these things that commercial ratepayers are not able to pay for themselves. And in fact, the rate setting structure does not enable them to pay that much, even if they wanted to, which naturally we don't. So the legislative, to segue into legislative issues, as much as everybody wants to see something done for the Postal Service, nothing is being done. The PMG Brennan, when she went to the Hill in April, wanted this ginormous amount of money, which clearly was dead on arrival. I mean, $89 billion, even in their largesse at the time when they checks, I think $89 billion was a lot of money to ask for. But there's been no money forthcoming at all. And there's been resistance from, of course, the administration and from the colleagues in the Senate to anything, even though the House is willing to write checks till tomorrow morning. So all of this, of course, is just a question of money. Is there any attention being given to the larger issues, to pre-funding? No. To Medicare integration for employee health care? No. To basic problems with the business model and product price being given, no attention is being given to those things because, of course, the Postal Service hasn't burnt down yet. It's still struggling to go along. So until it does have a serious problem, probably nothing will be done about it. The analogy that I like to make is Congress would not buy a fire truck until the building was on fire, because, of course, why do it ahead of time? Regulatory issues at the PRC, excuse me. They are still trying to finish their 10-year review, which they began in 2016, because the charter they were given was to find a way to fix whatever is wrong within your purview. A translation of that means whatever is wrong is the current rate setting process is not allowing enough revenue for the Postal Service to be financially stable. The Postal Service's financial instability is not because you can't raise rates enough. That's not the problem. The problem is, of course, pre-funding and other things that are not part of the PRC's purview, but the PRC was told, fix the Postal Service's financial problem within the purview of the rate setting process. And it ain't going to work. Everybody knows that. So they're kind of in a bit of a rock and a hard place circumstance over here on how to resolve this rate setting review, given the fact that they can't say what they really might want to say about what the problems are that are causing the situation to start with. The price increase, yes, there will be a rate increase next year, probably coming out in October, based on the August CPI, which came out last week. So right now, the class level cap is 1.458%. So that is the lowest level, the lowest cap authority they've had now in over 2 years. I think I looked it up. It was still 2017 was the last time the cap was this low. So when you see a rate increase coming along for market dominant products in January at the class level, that's going to be what it is. Now, every time when you have a rate case, I always remind folks that that's a class level number. Within the class, you may have changes that are lesser or greater, depending upon what's happening in that category. Would carrier route go up a little more than 3-digit? Well, that's an example of what could happen. You may have no increase in something and a big increase in something else. If you recall, a couple of years ago, we had the price of a stamp jump a nickel, while some rates for pre-sorted mail went down. And the next year, that was flipped. The price of a stamp didn't change. Prices for some types of pre-sorted mail went up a lot. Again, at the class level, though, in both cases, you stayed under the cap. So what's going to happen this year? We have to wait and see. Cost coverage, same old here. No news at all. You still got underwater categories. You still got flats underwater. And the annual compliance review that Postal Regulatory Commission will conduct next year will again say you've got underwater categories. You need to fix it. Well, if you've got classes of mail that are 5 and 10 and 20% below cost coverage, but you have a 1.5% cap, how are you supposed to pick up the difference? And that's a situation which even they realize is mathematically impossible. So that's going to be something you're going to keep hearing about ad infinitum. For commercial mailers, of course, the people at the bottom of the hill here, there's considerable angst. Clients are uncertain of what's going on. The point that we made in an editorial in the newsletter yesterday's issue, I know you've all read it very religiously, said that despite all the poor communications from the Postal Service, the upshot of all the news that's going around out there, the unrefuted allegations, charges, concerns, worries, claims, and hyperbole, mailing people like to check, the clients are becoming uncertain about what to do. And this is hurting commercial mailers because, of course, you've got all these anti-clients now who aren't committing to do business because they don't know what's going on in the Postal Service. And that goes back to the Postal Service's failure to communicate. Who's that? What was that movie with Paul Newman, where we know what we have here is a failure to communicate? Well, we have a big one here with the Postal Service. They're not saying what's going on. They're not reassuring ratepayers. They're not reassuring their customers that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So that's a problem that becomes the problem of commercial mailers. If you are a business, you've seen in your own neighborhoods, in your own environments, what's going on. Those who are better set up, who are better managed, who are less leveraged, are the ones who can weather through the circumstances we see today more successfully or not. How well did you prepare for a rainy day, and did you buy enough umbrellas because it's pouring? Another problem that's emerging right now is labor. Depending where you are, I guess many places, as I've heard it from a lot of locations, because of how the unemployment checks are being written these days, it's better to stay home and not work than to go to work because of how the pay scale at some commercial mailing or printing operations compares to what people can make at home. And as much as this sounds backwards, that wasn't what unemployment was designed to do. The odd circumstances now in some situations, in some places, workers are literally making more money staying home than if they went to work. This is creating shortages of labor for those companies that do have work, that are fortunate enough to continue to bring in clients. So that's another bizarre challenge for the commercial mailer. So here's what we got right here. We got all this going on. Volume and revenue will probably continue through 2020 and into next year, but we hope to see it continue to pick up a little bit later on this year through the holiday season and into next year. The nice part about having all these packages, it's great. Good revenue. How long is it going to last? How much of the Postal Service keep? Because every time that you see parcels coming in, that means less pressure on the letters and flats mailers because they're not able to sustain the cost of the Postal Service on their own. Service issues, yeah, they're not going to go away for a while until everybody's healthy. Everybody can go outside and move around. People can go to work and not be concerned about viruses. You're going to see a certain level of service challenge because of worker absenteeism, because of a lack of transportation, because nobody's flying and airlines aren't going to move mail around all by itself. So the financial situation is going to be as stinky as it's been, probably worse for quite a while. And please don't look at Congress to help out, because right now they're too busy telling everybody what a great job they're doing so they can get reelected, and they're not going to help the Postal Service or mailers at all. And we have an infrastructure that we talked about before that simply cannot be easily shrunken to the size it should be because there's less volume in the system. And for the industry, the trends that we've been seeing for years, particularly on the mailing side, somewhat on the printing side, but particularly on the mailing side, are going to continue to go on to the misfortune of some folks in our segment. So what are you going to do? Well, obviously, because we are who we are, we urge you to stay in touch with us. We have our, I would say, award-winning newsletter. I like that term. That comes out every 2 weeks. Came out yesterday. Come out again another 13 days. We have our website where we post what's going on as far as COVID is concerned. And there are the sources of public information from the Postal Service, the industry alerts, and the DNN advisories, sometimes duplicative, but they're there anyways. I guess upon reflection, it's like a chess game. Players, if you play chess, you get rid of the pawns to protect the more important pieces. So in this chess game, we're sucked into now, who are the pawns? There are people who have a lot more oomph than we do, who are sacrificing the pawns for their own purposes. So the question is, who are the pawns? Do we be pawns? I guess that's fair to say that we are the pawns. So good luck to us. That is the fast and dirty summary of what's going on in the world. I hope you found some information here. And if you've got any questions, I'd be able to take them. Let's see. First question I see over here in the chat, in the question box. Any word on a new deputy PMG? No. I am not surprised. There hasn't been an awful lot of news forthcoming from the Postal Service about what's going on in that regard. The deputy is hired by the board and the PMG, and then everybody else who's an executive in the Postal Service is hired by the PMG. But there are 5 statutory positions, including the PMG and deputy, and those are individuals who are positions that are required by law. So we have not seen a new deputy come along yet, and I think at this point, anyone who would be considered might well wish they weren't, because if they are chosen by the current leadership, they will immediately be painted with the same brush, whether they deserve it or not. So for the time being, maybe not having one is not a bad thing for that person, at least. Let's see, what else we have in the question box here? I cannot read the questions. Let's see here. Oh yes, you have a deck. You have a slide deck here for those of you who are on the line. You can download that to follow along. You think the USPS needs a special appropriation to stay financially solvent? Yes. The gap between assets and liabilities is getting too great. There is no way that the Postal Service can enjoy an enormous uptick in mail to pay enough to generate enough revenue to close that gap. Its expenses are going in one direction, and its incomes are going in the other. Many of its costs are related to things that are not profitable. No offense to my nonprofit friends, nor to those who are periodicals or some flats. You've got things that just aren't making enough money. You've got a lot of post offices that don't make enough money. You've got a lot of things dragging, and you have the pre-funding obligation. So those are not things that the rate-paying community, the people whose mail comes in the back dock, 2/3 of whatever the number is now of mail volume that comes in the back dock is going to pay for the billions and billions and billions that are owed. It's just not possible. So if Congress wants a lot of the things that are out there causing costs for the Postal Service, then Congress at some point is going to have to do the responsible thing and kick in a little bit of money into the kitty. Of course, I would not recommend that any of you hold your breath till that happens. Let's see here. Understand that you have a new service or subscribers, a job board. And yes, yes, we do. If any of you actually, not just subscribers, but we have a job board now where you can post if you have looking for somebody. And we have an equipment exchange where you can say, I got an extra inserter or 7, and if you'd like to buy one, or I'm looking for one. Both of those things are accessible through our homepage, and we'd be happy to have anybody who wants to take advantage of them to do so. Let's see, yeah, both are free. Let's see. Those were all things we had asked. People had asked me for a long time to put those up, so we finally put them up. So they're there. As I said earlier, and yes, here's a PBS pitch again. If you enjoy watching your local PBS Mailers Hub, we would appreciate your being a faithful subscriber, and we are extending to those of you on the call today the opportunity to do so at a discount. So welcome to you. Otherwise, I see no more questions coming in here. I hope you took a lot away from today's conversation. I hope that you will not join the ranks of people who are running around with their hair on fire about the Postal Service failing tomorrow. There will be a Postal Service. It's not going to go out of business. It's going to keep delivering mail. It can handle what's coming up in the election and holiday season. So I don't think there's any reason to worry about that. Let's see. Why is the Postal Service not reducing their sales of plastic mailers? Plastic mailers. I'm not quite sure what plastic mailers are, but that I'm not sure what you're referring to. So I can't really say what the answer to the question is. If I don't know what plastic mailers are. I guess I missed that one. But if you want to send me an email separately, I can look into it and see if I can answer your question more intelligently. Let's see. Change proposal. Padded mailers. Oh, padded mailers. Padded mailers. I don't know why they're not changing their sales. I don't know what that would. I guess they put those into post offices as convenience to people who want to mail something, and I don't think there's any purpose to reducing it. I don't know. I haven't looked into that, honestly. Let's see here. Any other questions? Nothing else coming in. Well, as I say at the conclusion of every webinar, we appreciate your callers. You can see on the screen how to contact us. If you want any further questions, drop us a note, info@mailershub.com. Next month, we will have another webinar, and hopefully at that point, we'll have a rate case to discuss. We'll be talking about that. So until then, I want to thank Michelle and Jennifer for helping today with the webinar, making sure that all of this works right, because I'm just a pretty face here. And I'm trying to get some information out to folks. We appreciate you being on the other end of the line to take it. Again, thank you again for calling in today. If you have any other questions, contact us. But until we speak again next month, thanks again. Take care. Bye.